Welcome back to our final topic, Topic 3.12 in Era 3 of APUS History. This topic deals with the issue of movement in the early Republic and how the migration patterns caused changes and especially conflict over time. The movement of peoples to and around the U.S. was also important in developing regional differences regarding slavery and the use of slave labor. In the aftermath of the Revolution, with the population growing both by natural reproduction and immigration, the population began moving westward. As we've already seen, the Ohio River Valley was the first target for this westward expansion, with many Revolutionary War veterans claiming land bounties in the area. Remember also that some of the states had previously had western land claims and had surrendered those to the national government, and that national government was now selling that land in the Ohio River Valley, attracting settlers from not just the coastal states, but from around the world. The opportunity to buy land was a major attraction for immigrants, who mostly would never have had that opportunity in Europe, where land ownership was generally restricted to the nobility. And since farms in the New England area had generally been smaller than areas further south, subdividing amongst multiple children as an inheritance was often not possible, leaving many from New England looking to go westward as well. The Northwest Ordinance that encouraged this expansion may have been passed by the Congress under the Articles of Confederation, but the law was still in effect under the new Constitution and was used to divide up this new land with the plan of eventually adding more states. And naturally, as we have seen, this movement westward put American settlers into conflict with Native Americans who were already living in those areas. Inevitably, the militias would defeat the native peoples and sign a treaty forcing the Native Americans further to the west so that white Americans could claim that land. And remember, slavery was not legal in these Northwest territories. The agreements that the Americans signed with the Native Americans usually promised that the Native Americans, in exchange for moving westward, would have their lands in the future left alone. But the U.S. government almost never upheld those promises, typically breaking their agreements with Native Americans repeatedly. You had a similar desire to go westward among Southerners, but in their case it was often looking for land because the quality of their land had declined as nutrients were depleted, especially in the tobacco-growing regions. And once the cotton gin was invented, the race was on to grab as much land as possible that was suitable for growing short-staple cotton. This, in turn, upped the demand for slaves who were needed to work the fields growing the cash crops that the southern plantations produced for an international market. Much of the early western expansion in the South, though, was concentrated in the upper South, in the Kentucky and Tennessee area, largely because of the presence of large organized tribal groups, the so-called 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, the Creek, the Choctaw, the Chickasaw, and the Seminole in Florida, which effectively prevented expansion until those tribes could be removed from the southeastern United States. Development of textile mills in the New England area after 1789, coupled with the invention of the cotton gin in 1793, meant that the free laborers in those textile mills of the North would essentially be dependent on the slave labor of the South to produce the raw materials, the cotton, that they needed for those factories. This textile industry would grow rapidly, especially in New England, because of the abundance of fast-flowing rivers that could provide power to machinery in the mills, which in turn created a need for laborers, attracting still more people to that region, both from farms moving into towns, as well as from Europe moving to these American towns where the mills were located. This increased industrialization in the northern regions, coupled with the continued reliance on agriculture in the southern regions, created distinct differences between the North and the South, fueling tensions over slavery, some of which already existed. Remember, Congress was not allowed to outlaw the international slave trade until 20 years after the passage of the U.S. Constitution, as a result of one of the many compromises that had been needed in order to create that government in the first place. And they did in 1808. But there were no restrictions on the internal migration of slaves, so slave owners regularly sold slaves from areas of declining production to areas of increasing demand. And we'll delve more into that issue as we get into Era 4, particularly when we look at the market revolution, which really took off in the aftermath of the War of 1812. But for now, just know that you have an increasing agricultural outlook in those southern states, and you're starting to see a bit more of an industrialization in those northern states. And a lot of it ties in to the textile industry. So that's what you need to know about topic 3.12 of APUSH History Movement in the Early Republic. And it also concludes all of Era 3, covering the time period 1754 to 1800. And we'll build more on these as we get into Era 4.